Today we're going to talk about the Make2d command, and the Make2d command is used to create orthographic renderings of our model. And it normally produces, as you can see, a front, top, side, and what we call an isometric view of the model. And it's a very useful tool, and we can use this information or these vector files because they get captured as curves and as text blocks as long as you don't explode them. And they give you an opportunity to annotate the scale information on your model. So what we're going to do during this tutorial, we're going to reproduce the Make2d renderings of our models, and then we're also I'm going to talk a little bit about annotation and how in our dimension style menu, and we can edit this style, we can do things to change the character of our annotations. These are called annotations. And so if we wanted to change the text height, we change the text height to 2 so that you can see what that looks like, and then put that in, it populates there. And that's a little bit too large, but that's a common problem that we see in a lot of renderings is things like this. And so here we can adjust the size of our text to how we want it. And I'm going to go down to 1. I think 1's best. I had it right the first time. That allows you to change the size. You can also change the character of your arrows, your hash lines. I would open up that menu and play with it. But what we're going to do is go over the workflow with the Make2d command of creating the vector file, the vector curve file of your orthographic file of your model. Talk about how to export it to Illustrator, and which we use as a pass-through on our way to Photoshop, where it can be incorporated into our compositions. So I want to talk a little bit today about the Make2d command. We'll continue our discussion about the Make2d command, and today I want to just focus on how it works from within Rhino, how it works from within Rhino. And basically the way that it works is that we select a geometry and we run the Make2d command on it. That geometry has to be surfaces. That's a big part of it. It has to be surfaces, and you may need to convert your model from a mesh to a NURBS object using that command to convert it to a surface. Once you convert it to a surface, it'll capture project the orthographic information of your model to the top plane, and you'll get a front, top, side view and an orthographic drawing as you've created from within your perspective window. And in addition to that, you have your objects, as I stated, but you also have what we like to call annotations. These are annotations. Those are used to designate the size and scale of your object as it's been designed within the Rhino environment. And that's the information that you'll output as a vector. As you can see, you can also use it as an element within the framework of your Rhino environment and renderings that you produce there. So that's another way that you can think about composing and presenting this information as it's done here. But we're going to talk a little bit about the Make2d command from within Rhino. Okay, let's begin with the Make2d command. I'm going to start by getting rid of some of the stuff that I've baked into this model. I'm going to turn off the orthographics layer, and I'm also going to turn off the head layer because we don't need that. So generally what you want to do is that you want to compose your image as you would like for it to appear in your orthographic window. And let me check my display here. My display here is X-ray. Okay. It's X-ray, so let me go to the top and I'm going to go into X-ray mode. Or, what was that view? Here, we'll go here and we'll go into X-ray mode. Okay, good. And you can set up your composition the way that you'd like for your object to appear in this orthographic view. And once done, you can select your object, and the command is Make2d. And you want for view USA, you want to have visible lines and visible tangents in your models, and you want to show tangent edges. And then you click on OK. And at that point, you're going to have to wait a little bit as the command is executed. So I'm going to pause this. Now that the curves have been projected onto the top window, let's move them around and sort of get them formatted. What I'd like to do first, I always like to group curves first so that we can just grab them and use those as individual units. And then let's take this and we'll move this in. I set up this this box to sort of use as a guide. Normally I only move these in along one axis. Here I got a little ahead of myself there. And let's move this. And I just want to compose these within this box because I know that that's like the way that I had this set up. Okay. And let me zoom in on those members. Okay, so now can do now is we want to get the dimensioning information, so we select one of these. We want a bounding box. And we want a bounding box on this one here. We'll do this one right here. And now that we have our bounding boxes, and those are references always, and so we can move that to the reference layer. I can now start to pull my dimensions, and the command is dimension, linear dimension. You want to make sure that your end snap is turned on. And you bring up your dimensions right here. And you continue to bring up your dimensions. And here you want to line those up like so. Okay, and of course this dimension and that dimension are going to be equal. So if we were to run this one right here, we're going to get that. Okay, and so now we have our dimensioning information, and here if we were to go there, that would be placed in there. But let's look at the top view for another second, and I want to show you how you can also change the size of your dimensioning information, and that's through dimensions, dimension styles. Use your dimension styles, and you can edit the default dimensions, and in that way, if you wanted to change the size of the text, we could make it 1.5, and we could do a preview, and you notice that the text is enlarged. So now you should be able to control the proportion of the text in your designs to the objects themselves, and you can adjust the size of the arrows, the weight thickness of the lines. You have a lot of things that you can adjust in there, and then you click OK. But you should go in there and explore and play around with that. So now this is ready. Let me lock this layer down, because now we're ready to take these elements right here, and do a file, export selected, and we're going to send these to Adobe Illustrator as a vector file for Illustrator. Okay, and once we've done that, as I've done here, now we're ready to go into Illustrator and use that as a pass-through to prep this for Photoshop. So I will pause this at this moment. Once you've loaded your file into Illustrator, there are several things that you can do to adjust the file as you pass it through the Photoshop. One of the first things that you can do is that you can select all of your curve information, as I've done here, and I want to change that point size to 0.25, and so now the stroke on that is a lot less and a lot clean for its journey into Photoshop. And you can play around with the stroke on your object, and it's very good to be able to do that. Another thing that you can do is that these are all text blocks, so you can actually go in here with your text tool, and I should have updated the whole thing when I came in initially, but you can grab your text block, and if you wanted to change that into another unit or round it off, you might decide to round this number off to 11, or you might want to have the file represented in centimeters. You could do that if you like, and you can adjust the text whether it's horizontal or vertical. So in this case, I might just want to call this 15.5, and then round that off to 15.5. One of the other things that you can do with your direct selection tool, you can select your arrows in your design, and if you wanted to adjust the stroke on those, you could also adjust the stroke on those elements. You could select that, and then you could change the value of the stroke to 1, and as you can see, it makes that much darker, and that way you could go about adjusting the stroke on all of your elements to make that much more prominent in design as you pass it through to Photoshop. You can also change the value, round off the value to 15.5 from 15.49 to 15.5 using your type tool. And let me exit isolation mode here and hit A there. You can also select these and also increase the point size on that. I'm going to make those 1 point so that you can see that really clear, and you can change the point size on those. Hold on the shift key and select those, and then change the point size and play around and change. You could actually change the font if you wanted to. So there are a lot of things that you can do here within Illustrator to prepare this for its pass through to Photoshop. And once completed, the work can then be saved as any Illustrator file, and you can just save it as orthographic 2A. This will be the converted version. Sometimes there's a problem with Photoshop reading the file straight from Rhino that may have been fixed in version 6. Here's in this case we use Illustrator as a pass-through to Photoshop. In this video, we're going to deal with the vector file that was imported into Photoshop, where it's saved on a transparent background, which allows it to easily be incorporated into your layered compositions. And as with other layers, you can apply effects to it in order to incorporate that dimension information into your viewport rendered uh, illustration of your model, and it's a really nice way of presenting that information. What we're going to do in the next video is that we're actually going to take this image and we're going to deconstruct it and almost move it in reverse so that we can talk about how it was made and use that as an opportunity to discuss how render layers and render passes from your viewport renderer can be used with Photoshop to create some really dynamic concepts for presentation. Okay, what I hope to do in this conversation, as I stated before, is to sort of build this in reverse, and in doing so, I can teach you some things about how you can render in passes and use the viewport render to do rendering passes to create dynamic illustrations. Okay, so in this case, and I added this layer here. I have this gray layer as the backdrop, as the background for my compositions, and I like having a gray layer there. So in this case, this was a duplication of two flattened layers from the original composition so that I could do this effect where I used a gradient layer mask to reveal the linear work there on the head. And that's how I went forward creating this final effect for the design. And on this I also had a layer of text, or I brought in the orthos as a layer, and that layer has its own effect on it. It has an effect, it has an outer glow and a drop shadow on it to create the effect that you see there. I'm going to go over to this image here and work from this image, which I use to do my flattened versions, which I'll show you that I use in the prior illustration. But this is sort of like the working layered composition of from the viewport renderer. And I included this background here so that we could look at this and see some of the elements up against the background. And so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to turn off the elements, and I'm going to sort of build this from the ground up so that you can get a sense of how it was done. And we're going to start with the background layer. The background layer is composed of three elements, as you can see. The first element is a rendered version of the model with directional shadows to give you that nice hard shadow, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to get a nice grayscale, sort of like occlusion image that I could use to get that hard shadow. And to that, I added a two-color background here, and I played around with the colors in Photoshop. So you can see that here, how I played around with the blur to really create that composition. And here I added a four-color design here, and in that way mixed those two together to create that background. And onto that we added this element there. From there, if I turn these off, I go to this layer. This is the layer where I created a series of passes to create the body of the figure here, and to create the transparent look that you see here with the lines built over them. And you can see that as a series of passes, and we go from the top down. I had this ghosted this image from a ghosted rendering, and I went in and created like a pen, that feel right there with the wide image there, two wide layers, sort of created that feel there. And with that, this multiplied against that. And you can see that almost all of these are multiplied against each other. And then to that I added this ghosted version. A blurred ghost. And together these created sort of like that feel, which is what I was going after in this rendering. To that I created there were two text layers that were created. There was a subtext layer here created, and there was a main text layer that was created with the legends, and each one of those had its own layered style, so that when added to the background and the other elements, it created a really nice dynamic backdrop, especially with the noise added to one of these sub layers. And then the sort of finishing touch was the orthographic information that was here. So I hope that in looking at this, you can begin to get a sense of how powerful a tool your viewport renderer is, and how you can use those passes, and we should think of them as passes, as part of layered composition, artistic compositions that you create between Rhino and Photoshop. I hope that this was useful. I think this is a very exciting area.